From climate change to climate justice. In this presentation, we're going to examine the basis of the climate justice discourse. Climate change is the most likelihood caused by the greenhouse gas effect. Greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide are gases capable of absorbing infrared radiation, thereby trapping and holding heat in the Earth's atmosphere. This process occurs naturally, but human activities such as the burning of fossil fuels, deforestation, and agricultural activities have led to a rapid increase of greenhouse gases in the Earth's atmosphere. The increase in the emission of greenhouse gases can be traced back to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Since then, global mean temperature has risen by 0.8 degrees. Climate change, due to its anthropogenic aspects, does not exist in a historical vacuum. It is estimated that industrialized countries have thus far been responsible for 3/4 of the cumulative global greenhouse gas emissions. The possibility of burning large amounts of fossil fuels and emitting other greenhouse gases without any outside limitations facilitated the development of the countries of the global north. It is important to note that carbon dioxide has an atmospheric lifespan of about 100 to 300 years and therefore accumulates in the Earth's atmosphere. While industrialized countries have been responsible for the accumulation of greenhouse gases in the Earth's atmosphere, they have been and largely remain the sole beneficiary of these emissions. If we understand the Earth's absorptive capacity as a global commons which everybody has equal rights to, then the industrialized countries have long since exhausted, in fact, historically overused their fair share of greenhouse gas emissions. This overconsumption is also referred to as emission debt. Climate change will have a significant impact on the environment. The change of weather patterns is said to result in a global increase of extreme weather conditions such as typhoons, hurricanes, floods, and droughts. Sea level rise bears the risk of salinization of coastal aquifers, coastal erosion, and inundation of coastal areas in low-lying regions. Some scientists say that low-lying islands such as the Maldives, with about 1.3 meters above sea level, could be completely uninhabitable by the year 2100. Species extinction, even in keeping with the 2-degree guardrail, is estimated to be at approximately 5.2%, threatening to result in the collapse of fragile ecosystems. The environmental impacts of climate change will also affect human life. More extreme weather will lead to an increase in health risks. In many parts of the world, weather extremes and the overall change of weather patterns will decrease agricultural yields and the amount of arable land. By increasing pressure on natural resources, such as land and water, climate change can potentially exacerbate human conflicts. Natural disasters, food insecurity, and social conflicts will force many people to migrate. The environmental, economic, and political implications of climate change are most likely to disproportionately affect low-income countries as well as poor people in high-income countries. It has been estimated that developing countries are on average twice as vulnerable to the effects of climate change as industrialized countries. Small island developing countries are said to be even 3 times as vulnerable. Climate change vulnerability is defined as the ability to cope with changing climate conditions. 3 factors contribute to the extent of climate change vulnerability. One factor is the exposure to climatic changes and weather extremes. Another factor is human sensitivity. Many developing countries rely heavily on agricultural productivity, which climate change is going to adversely impact. The third factor, adaptive capacity, describes the financial and technological resources to adapt to the impacts of climate change. The 3 most prominent strategies for responding to climate change are mitigating greenhouse gas emissions, adapting to the impacts of climate change, and accounting for loss and damage. For developing countries, the implementation of these strategies faces severe challenges since they are all associated with high costs. As we've seen, both responsibility for causing climate change and vulnerability to the impacts of climate change are unequally distributed. Those who have done very little to cause the problem will be the ones most affected by the environmental shocks implicated in climate change. Inevitably, the question arises, what does a fair distribution of the responsibilities and burdens look like? This mismatch between responsibility and vulnerability lies at the heart of the climate justice discourse. The climate justice discourse addresses a variety of justice concerns. At the moment, the most prominent among them are procedural justice, distributive justice, and perceived justice. Procedural justice is concerned with the implementation of fair and inclusive procedures in the decision-making process. Distributional justice investigates the question who should be allowed to emit greenhouse gases and to what extent. Today, for the most part, there is agreement that historical emissions have to be taken into account, but the extent to which the asymmetrical distribution of emissions should be considered remains highly disputed. Perceived justice examines the gaps between different actors' perceptions of justice. Climate justice inspired the application of justice claims to the climate change discourse by asking the question how the costs and responsibilities associated with climate change are to be shared in a just and equitable way. By addressing these questions, the climate justice discourse also faces some challenges. The global implications of climate change will enlarge the number of affected people, while at the same time blurring the lines between affected communities. The prolonged timescale from past causes to present impacts and future implications compels for intergenerational considerations. Finally, climate justice claims will face legal challenges due to the trans and international nature of conflicts. Some have argued that approaching climate change through the lens of justice can lead to a clash of differing perceptions of justice, thereby hindering agreements on much-needed international climate policies. While potentially decelerating the policy-making process, climate justice presents a powerful tool, especially to otherwise marginalized groups, to organize and bring attention to the issues they are facing. In closing, I would like to share some quotes with you that exemplify the nature of some justice concerns in the climate change negotiations.